since the late 90s, in captive settings, obviously. And then I just reached a point in my captive work where I was looking for more answers for these animals. They've historically been a difficult species to maintain in captivity, especially with reproductive success and long term, and even with having long-term animals. So in early 2000s, I jumped on a plane and flew over to New Guinea. It's interesting enough that this island itself is politically divided down the middle as opposed to geographically divided. The western half is West Papua, Indonesia, and the eastern half is PNG. I focus my research on the western portion of West Papua, where you can see that arrow is right there. So I'm deep in the Mambramo Basin, and this is where I've been going for the last 15 years, studying a population number of animals that I've been able to locate. The weather parameters in this area that I am focusing on, the region or provenance is called Ilugua, and you can see this gorgeous female out here basking in the early morning. And like I had to say too, it took me about 3 or 4 trips initially to go out there to be able to find suitable habitat for these animals, or let alone just the right contact of people to be able to take me out there to these areas without the threat of putting me in a hot pot afterwards, or robbing me blind for everything. So, but once I found that, I found this population of these animals in this area that was being sustained, and the temperatures generally, for the most part, are pretty consistent. 49 at the lows I've taken in the early mornings, to 82, rarely, exceeding that in the daytime. And then, rainy season, January, May, dry season, June, December, breeding season, May, July. And when you say like rainy season, it's different from like if you were going to compare it to like say Costa Rica, where it's a rainy season. It's relatively drier in certain times of year, and then it's rainy. It's always raining in West Papua. It's just it might rain a little harder, or it might rain a little longer. So it's always wet there. So when you say that a rainy season, it's typically around April, where it's the wettest month, and it's like almost 8.3 inches of rain in some of these regions. So it's a really interesting habitat in general, especially for a large snake like this to be able to maintain itself and reproduce successfully. I mean, you're looking at animals that are around 8 to 9 feet on average, that can maintain themselves at temperatures of 49 degrees, at night, and then a big draw to like I said, up to the low 80s sometimes. This female, typically the activity patterns for these animals in the wild is early morning. When I say like around 10 to 12 or so, you'll see them outside basking, and then they're gone for the rest of the day when that cloud cover comes over. So it's like a little intermittent areas where the sun will come through, they'll take advantage of that heat real fast, they'll warm themselves up, and then they're gone and they're underground. This species, for the females for the most part, are predominantly fossorial, where they're residing underground most of the time, except for like basking opportunities, or feeding, or just stretching, I could say. So amongst the many species, obviously, that were on the private side as well as AZA side, that we're trying to reproduce in captivity, small ebolani still remains an enigma. There's sporadic successes with these animals, with still no rhyme or reason for how the outcome is achieved, which is very interesting still in today's day and age with our advancements in herpetoculture and herpetology, that we're still in the same place with these animals. We're able to keep them alive longer. However, if in doing so affects their reproductive outcome, we don't know. So we haven't really progressed to the point where we have a menu for success for these animals, in my opinion, certainly. So over time, going to this area, I've been able to figure out where the snakes live, what they feed off of naturally, where they nest, the wild behaviors and observations associated with them as well. And in my opinion, these observations and this information is invaluable for success with these animals, this taxa for the future. Taking useful data such as measurements and temperatures, obviously, diet, etc., are instrumental for captive success. And I feel like this animal is overlooked a lot because it's a python, for that matter, in my opinion. So I began with the work I do. Obviously, like I said, I had reached a point where I was not getting the answers that I was looking for or hoping for that matter. So I had to go there to find it myself. And like I said, it took me a while to do it, but I found it very successful now. These nesting surveys that I've been doing since 2008, sometimes traveling there twice a year to visit these areas and observe these animals, see what the females are doing, see if I can locate males, see what the clutches look like each year, see if the animals have moved places, and yada yada. And I've been able to record from all my GPS 11 of the 14 nests that I've been able to document in some of these areas. And you can see in some of the maps up here, or in this map up here, some of these nesting areas, interesting enough, are probably like within 20 to 30 feet from each other. So I found about 3 or 4 nests that were that close. And now when you say 20 to 30 feet, when you're comparing it into a highland, forest, that could feel like hours, because just the topography is up, down. It's like you're crawling through this, you're crawling through that, but still, like, just taking the measurements and everything like that in the areas, they're very close in proximity. And a couple times I found multiple females basking within close proximity of one another's nest. So this is my research hut that I had built for me out there. It's probably a Hilton right now for a bunch of locals when I leave, and it gives me the access, an opportunity to observe these animals naturally in this area. So this spot right here was already cleared in this area, and I've got 2 nests within, I think, a 45-minute hike from this location right here, where I'm able to observe animals with their natural behavior, to see what they're doing, and be able to collaborate with what the information we have in captivity, which is really, really sporadic still and limited. But you can see a big female. In these 2 pictures, there's 2 females actually. One of them sitting out on top of these plants basking in the morning. And there's another one, I think in that one on the bottom right there, she had actually been off a clutch of eggs rather, and she was basking up this tree, which is, you don't really see that often, so it was kind of cool to see that. I was really surprised actually. So here's some nest examples. They feed heavily, well, I would say predominantly off of the ground couscous, which is a large opossum type animal that's in West Papua. The locals feed off of them a lot as well. They feed off of these large meals once or twice a month, and then they take over these burrows. It's similar to the Lachesis behavior, where they're taking off the Paca burrows in a lot of ways. It's just the temperature's a lot different. And they'll go into these tunnels that these animals, after they feed off of them, will reshape it to kind of conform to what they want, and then they stay there. And you can see, obviously this, the way this is designed, it's perfect for these animals to reside in and live and brood their eggs as well. Here's some more examples of the nest. It's like a typical teepee kind of style. It allows the water to kind of run off the top, so it doesn't pool up in the bottom. So the environment is, like I said, it's a highland swamp essentially. So there's always standing water on the ground. But in this nest that they utilize, it creates a perfect habitat for them to survive in, as well as to lay their eggs and to incubate those eggs, as well as also for security too. I mean, they're a predominant predator, so they're the big dog on the mountain essentially. When they get to a certain size, there's not many predators out there that will feed off of Boelen's pythons, except for locals if they've given the opportunity. And then there's a New Guinea eagle that's out there that will take smaller animals, but once they reach a certain size, it's it. Nothing's going to bother them. So these nests are perfect for them to sustain it. Here's some more nesting inside examples. One of the things with Boelen's pythons is they really like that contact security. They really like this tight burrow. You will not see them in the wild in a loose coil underground. It's a lot of that, in my belief, is because the temperature is so dramatic there with how the lows go and now how the highs go, to an extent that they want to utilize every little bit of that temperature that they're able to maintain throughout the day in these tight little burrows. So they're keeping every little bit of warmth that they can to sustain them through the day activity, as well as through the cold nights. Because like I said, I've taken temperatures in 49. On average, it's in the low 60s, upper 50s. So you can see here, this female right here, she's burrowed in really well. The front of the nest here we opened it up just to get temperatures and all that. And then interesting also, I have to add that when we excavate the front portion of a nest like this, I always put it back the same way it's found, even every stick in the same way, because there's biological familiarity with these animals, with their habitat, so I don't want to disturb them at all when I'm doing this work. But I'm in there to get as much information as possible. Here I'm taking some temperatures of females sitting on nests. Egg temperatures around 79. I've got them up to about 82 on average, which is interesting because the successes that we've had in captivity was roughly around 14 or 15 reproductive successes to date, and that's throughout the world. The temperatures that they're artificially incubated at range anywhere from 84 to 88 from what I've heard. So it's interesting that I'm getting temperatures cooler like that, and it could be a healthier prognosis for the animals when they hatch, because it's a longer incubation time as a cooler, as opposed to being something hotter and faster. So there's a lot of info still that needs to be, or a lot of research that needs to be done with that. And you can see right here how this female is really tightly coiled around these eggs. It's about, a mass is about the size of a basketball, and the female's wrapped around all that, and she'll stay in there into that nest to roughly around 74, 75 days before those eggs start to hatch. But she will leave the nest on occasions. They will come out and bask sometimes. They'll come outside to get some water, but the way the nests are designed and in the habitat, she doesn't have to go far to be able to hydrate herself. She can just stick her head outside sometimes because the water will cool out in the proximity of the nesting area that she's at. So here's some more nesting chamber examples. This female on the left here, this was the deepest burrow I ever found. I've got some info coming up that you'll see, but this one measured roughly close to 3 feet down, which was a first for me because typically they're right around a foot to 2 feet in length, they're in depth rather. This just happened to be a really deep chamber, but you can see this female sitting on these eggs, brooding these eggs. I took temperatures of, outside the nest, which was around 69 degrees, then going in about another 6 inches, it went up to about 71, and you can feel the temperature change as you were pulling out substrate and all this debris inside there, which is mostly peat and decomposing fibers and vegetation and such to help with that incubation process, or just to make that female feel comfortable and the humidity levels accurate for her. So the nesting chamber data and some of the egg data that I pulled, female on the left, entrance width, and obviously it's not this big exposed area because this whole area is closed in, it's like a little pinhole. So the entrance is relatively small, 2.5, 3 inches for the entrance height itself, 1.5 inches. And the max depth, like I said, up to 3 feet on these. The egg weight itself, each egg varies. However, they're usually around 104 to 114 grams. That's about average. So it's a little smaller python egg. I mean, obviously, when I say smaller to it, when you compare it to something that's large. So it's not a huge egg by any means. Clutch size, counted up to 14 eggs. In a large female, that's about 9 feet. And then the clutch weight is around 1,600 grams max for these animals. So you can see this nest on the right there, the female was out basking. So we took advantage to get some photos and temperature gradients and things like that could be prove useful for us. So why is all this interesting? So studying Somali boeleni, the nesting ecology, can expand obviously our understanding of this species, this highland species. One interesting thing with them is the nesting behavior on the snake as opposed to other pythons. When you say a nest, technically refers to construction, the modification of it. Like you would think of a bird, pulling like leaves and branches and stuff and creating something, or a king cobra that's actually constructing a nest to be able to utilize for reproduction. So I'm seeing like a lot of behavior associated with that, obviously not to the extent of taking debris from areas and moving it in, but they go into these nests, these burrows, these food sources that they're taking advantage of, and they're creating it into their own nest chamber essentially. They feed, like I said, heavily off the ground couscous, and they take those burrows over. And then the female, with many other snakes, remain in this nest chamber until the eggs are, starting hatching, and they'll remain in these areas if these are suitable conditions that they favor. Personally, I feel like nesting is a overlooked area with this particular species, and possibly with other python species, especially Somalia. It's more or less something considered at the later stages of reproductive of the reproductive cycle, as opposed to something when you're setting up an enclosure for one of these animals or a habitat. Nesting should be part of the, part is important as providing ultraviolet light or supplemental basking lighting as well. Leaf litter, branches, things like that. Nesting should be incorporated in the beginning with this, not later on when the animal is, quote unquote, in reproductive cycle. And then I'm also seeing some really interesting behavior on potential of evidence for the nest site fidelity, which is really interesting too with this species. So see, here's some examples. I'm finding now, in the last few years, I found multiple nests that had old eggshells in the nest chamber with a female actively sitting on a collection of eggs. So it could just be a coincidence, but it's something definitely interesting to be noted. The habitat is just very difficult habitat to traverse through, especially, for an animal as well, like an animal like this, because of the temperatures and whatnot. So why wouldn't they just want to, permanently reside in this area? And I'm seeing a lot of sign that suggests that potentially with these animals, with not all of them, but certainly some, where they'll leave a lot of biological markers left outside of their nesting chambers and in proximity of where they nest, in the form of sheds, feces, urates, and I found a skeleton on one of my trips too, with a couple feet away from one of these nest chambers. So there's a lot more going on with these animals as opposed to just a beautiful, beautiful snake living in a very, very cool environment. And that is where a lot of my research, is going to determine really, how we can incorporate these wild parameters and behaviors into captive collections to be able to help sustain these animals in captivity, for the future. Because from my data that I've collected over the years, there's not been a successful reproduction where they have gotten a clutch of eggs and hatching of eggs successfully in an AZA institution, and that's alarming in my opinion. I'm hoping that we can move forward with that by collaboration of other institutions as well as private individuals that are having success with these animals, be able to incorporate with the institutional specimens that are there. So I have a lot of passion for these snakes and the research that I'm doing, especially the environment that I go to in this incredible place called New Guinea. So I just thank you guys for having me here and allow me to present some of my information that I've collected over the years. And I hope some of this information can be utilized if some of the institutions here have small Ebolani in their collections. And I just wanted to say thank you. So if there's any questions, please feel free to ask.
Yes, sir.